Hello and welcome everyone. Today we'll be looking at the fundamentals of multivariate analysis. Particularly, we'll be focusing on regression. So we'll get started. So I haven't added the real application slide to this because it is very obvious that for undertaking good statistical analysis, multivariate analysis is most critical. What do you mean by multivariate analysis? Where you have, say, more than one IV and you are controlling for a couple of covariates, and that is when you want to do the analysis. So it's not a bivariate analysis like what you have studied earlier, like t-test and chi-square. This is called as multivariate analysis, where you can have more than one independent variable, and you can also control for a numerous number of covariates. Of course, there are also cases in which you have more than one dependent variable. Those are various other kind of analysis, but we are going to learn about regression, which is one of the most fundamentals and the most commonly used multivariate analysis within the health science field. All right, especially within the field of psychology and nutrition science, multivariate analysis is used extensively. All right, so basically in this tutorial, what you're going to learn is you're going to understand the fundamentals of what are the, say, assumptions and so on and so forth that needs to be met before you decide to do regression. And regression is, say, the mother analysis for many other modeling techniques. So modeling techniques such as confirmatory factor analysis, and you learned about survival analysis. A lot of other sort of analysis are based on regression. So regression, understanding and learning regression has wide applications, not only in performing regression, but also associated analysis, which falls under the canopy of regression, such as your survival analysis using Cox regression, or else confirmatory factor analysis and structural equation modeling. When you are validating questionnaires, again, which is an important epidemiological skill that you would be covering in your coming lectures and tutorials. But yes, so therefore, from a theoretical point of view in epidemiology, my role is to help you understand the theory behind regression. And I'll just show you a quick running example in SPSS. But of course, as you can appreciate, undertaking regression systematically, that is part of quantitative statistics. And if and when you are doing quantitative statistics as one of your units, that is where you will learn about various methods of undertaking regression and types of regression in the SPSS software, for instance, because that is the one which we commonly use at UC. All right. So yes, exactly how to do regression, that is going to be part of your another unit. But this unit helps you to understand the theory behind regression. Why? Because once you know what is regression, what are the assumptions that need to be met, you can take the correct and accurate decision of deciding whether regression is a suitable technique for you to use in your research project for data analysis or not. Okay, so to come to that decision making, you need to know the theory, or else you will not know whether this is the right technique to use or not. Okay. So yes, two most common types of regression are your linear regression and binary logistic regression. Linear regression, your dependent variable is continuous, whereas in binary logistic, as the term suggests, binary, your dependent variable is bicategorical. It has two categories. All right. And linear model, then you have in linear regression, you have, say, two types of, regression. So the first one is linear model with one predictor. So you have, for instance, one IV, one DV. One DV is always constant. You always have one DV when we are performing this basic simplistic regression. All right. So yes, you have one IV, you have one DV, and you make a control for a couple of covariates. So over here, for instance, the IV is amount in minutes of sunlight. So it is amount in minutes. So it's a continuous variable. IV is continuous. Your DV over here is serum vitamin D levels, which is your blood level of vitamin D, which is again a continuous variable. Okay, so your IV and DV are continuous, and maybe you're controlling for participants' age, gender, ethnicity, so on and so forth. Okay. So yes, controlling for meaning you're adjusting for these potential covariates which could have influenced the association between the IV and the DV. Okay, and of course, when we do a mock, say practice example, we'll see how we control for variables. Then you have linear model with more than one predictor, predictor meaning your independent variable, and this is called as multiple regression. Okay, so over here you have more than one independent variable. So I've just given a hypothetical example. You may have four predictors in your say research project which you're doing. It could be, say, the amount of sunlight in minutes. That is the one which we covered earlier. Then you have time of the day, meaning the time of the day the individual exposes himself or herself to the sun, morning, afternoon, evening. So this is categorized. This has three categories. And yes, you can have independent variables which are categorical in regression as well. So your IV can be continuous, your IV can be categorical, it can be bi-categorical, two categories, or else it can be having more than two categories. That is completely okay in regression. So when you're actually learning how to do regression in your quantitative analysis or research unit, that is where you learn. If you have, say, a independent variable which is categorical in nature and it has, say, more than two categories, then there is a concept which is called as dummy coding. So this is the thing which you have to do when you are actually doing regression in practice in your other unit. You would actually dummy code one of your, say, um, one of these subgroups over here, morning, afternoon, evening. One of them would be dummy coded for it to be used in regression. Okay, so yes, as you will appreciate, teaching you exactly how to do regression in SPSS is not part of this unit because it is quantitative research. But this is something you can keep in mind when you are actually learning how to do regression in another unit. All right, then your IV over here, say it could be dietary vitamin D, meaning vitamin D intake via food, which could be grams per day, and it could be dietary fat intake as well, which is grams per day. And why have I included fat intake? This is just an FYI for nutrition students who may be knowing this, is that vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. So if you're having fat in the diet alongside with vitamin D in the diet, this enhances the absorption of vitamin D. Okay, so these could be your, say, four independent variable, and then you can have one outcome variable or dependent variable, which is your blood level of vitamin D. Okay, so this is called as multiple regression, where you have more than one independent variable in your model or in your analysis. Okay, so we will be looking at multiple regression very briefly when I actually show you how to do regression in SPSS, but please do understand what I show you is very brief and preliminary. You would actually have to take a proper unit such as quantitative research or statistics to learn the various methodological procedures involved in undertaking regression in a statistical software such as SPSS. Okay. All right. So now there are a few important key terminologies which are very important when you're talking about regression. So one is called the theoretical, say, terminology is called as goodness of fit. Okay. So what is goodness of fit? So goodness of fit is basically telling you, is your model a good model or a poor model? Okay. And how is that determined? That is determined by how close are these red dots to your line of regression. So this blue color solid line, this is called as the line of regression. Okay, so basically this is like your central tendency, the concept which we covered earlier. So meaning the more closer the dots are to your central tendency, better is the model, better fit is the model. It's a good model. Okay, so basically this central tendency, if you have learned, it was either mean median mode when we study the basic of statistics. All right, so similarly over here, central tendency is, say, depicting on an average, what is the on an average sort of a overall trend in your model. Okay, so meaning maybe, say, if I have to say, I have a class of 80 students who are undertaking epidemiology, and the overall average marks are 60 out of 100. Okay, hypothetical. So this central tendency represents the overall average trend. And then all of these red dots, they are the individual cases. Okay, so meaning I have 80 students. So each student is one individual dot. Okay, so student number 1, 2, 3, 4 till 80. Okay, so each dot is one student. This is called as your participant case or case ID or your participant number. Okay, so all of these red dots represent the 80 students which are there in the class. The blue solid line, this is called as the line of regression, which represents the central tendency, the overall trend, which you are seeing in your data set. Okay, and more closer the dots are to the line, it is telling you a comprehensive story. It is telling you a unanimous story. If the dots are scattered anywhere and everywhere, meaning it is not a very good model. You cannot really make conclusions out of this model. What are you trying to say? That, oh yes, 2% of the student say are having the average marks of 60 out of 100. Everybody else is scoring very low or very high. So why is there so much of discrepancy? Is there something going wrong with the teaching style? Or is there, say, technical error with the online mode of delivery? Or are students just not understanding? And this is, say, I'm teaching, say, postgraduate stuff to undergraduate students. So like there has to be something going wrong, which needs an explanation as to why you're not able to tell a unanimous story, because you do research to tell a unanimous story. You're doing research to find patterns, to find associations, to find trajectories of what is the story telling you. If you are not able to find a story, meaning you have to investigate this data further and find out what are the causes which is preventing the data set from telling a unanimous stories. Okay, and then it is about decision making, whether are these causes which you can address or you cannot address, or what you have to do. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So goodness of fit is, say, a very important theoretical concept in relationship to regression, which involves two important factors, which is your line of regression and your data points. All right. And basically, closer the dots are to the line of regression, better is the model, and vice versa. Okay. So in this, basically, over here, I want to tell you a third concept. The more further the dots are from the line of regression, which is what I explained. It is not telling a unanimous story, right? But in, say, in epidemiological and in statistical terms, what this distance means, this is called as error, it is called as residual, or it is called as variance. Okay, meaning the further the dots are from the line of regression, it is a bad model, because now you know why. All right, it is not telling a common story. Something is, there's a mismatch in this data, and we need to find out why are these dots so further apart. Okay, why are they not telling you a homogeneous story for you to make meaningful conclusions out of your data set? Okay, so yes, all this is called as loss over here. This loss in scientific term is called as residual, or say in simple terms, what I had explained earlier, variance. Okay, so I have, because these are very new concepts for you, wherever possible, I have tried to summarize it down in written statements as well. Okay, so just a quick summary. Again, so your solid line is called as the line of regression. Okay, it is, it shows you whether it shows you how your model is, okay, good or bad. So your model, as I said, line of regression is a marker of central tendency, all right, such as mean, for instance. Okay, and as I said over here, the same example I had taken, which is if you have 80 students in the class and 60% is what they receive, 60 out of 100, that is like, say, the mean or the average mark, that is, say, the overall tendency, and how are your individual data points faring according to the overall tendency. Okay, dots are your individual cases. They are those 80 individual students. The distance between the dot and the central and the line of regression, that is called as residual, or error, or residual sum of square, or variance. Okay, so all of this is the same. All right, so basically it is as distance. More distance, bad. Less distance, good. Okay, so in very, very simple terms. All right, so it is just like the concept of standard deviation as we have studied earlier. This is just to connect you back to the basics of, say, statistics, which you have learned, which will help you to remember these advanced concepts. Okay, so in standard deviation, we know smaller the standard deviation, better it is. Okay, so similarly over here, less distance between the dot and the line of regression, better is your model. All right. Okay, so yes, distance between the dot, which is also called as your observed value, participant case ID or case ID, and the solid line. Okay, your solid line is your predicted value, means this is the idealistic thing, which is what you want to see. Your line of regression and everything being close to the line of regression, the predicted value, the dots are the actual observed value. How is each and every individual faring in reference to your reference line, your benchmark line, or your central tendency line. Okay. So yes, for instance, student one can get 20 out of 100, the other one can get 80 out of 100. And these may be probably outliers, which are really far off. And most of the class are getting 60 out of 100, which are say around the line of regression. Okay. Then yes, at the end, remember if nothing, just remember this one thumb rule, that the take home message is um, more goodness of fit, you have better is your model. Okay, stronger is your model. Less goodness of fit, poor is your model. It's a really bad model. Okay, and it is not that it is bad, meaning you're going to get bad marks. No, it just means that this data requires further investigation. We have to find out which things are making this model poor. Are these things which can be addressed, or they are something to be considered for future research? So in research, there is nothing good and bad in terms of like, in terms of like, say your coursework, like, oh, you got good marks, bad marks. It's not like good and bad in that terms. It means when in epidemiological statistical terms, when I say bad is your model, it means there may be multiple other, say, independent variables which may be explaining the outcome variable. All right. And that's why you need to investigate the other factors before saying that yes, it is the association between IV and DV is so strong. So basically, what do I mean by that? Let me give you an say example. So as I said, I'm looking at sunlight exposure and blood vitamin D levels. Okay. And when I look at sunlight exposure, maybe I get a really bad poor model. Okay. So all of the dots are scattered everywhere. Everybody is having different type of sunlight exposure, and there is no pattern, there is no story, there is no meaningful finding which I can say identify as an epidemiologist and plan interventions out of it, or encourage people that this is what they can do, and maybe then health professionals can actually implement the interventions. So that is not happening. But when I look at say the amount of sunlight, and in combination I look at the type of occupation, then this is making my model much more stronger, because maybe it may so happen that the type of occupation is actually, say, confounding or mediating the relationship between amount of sunlight and your blood vitamin D levels. Maybe because it could be that say individuals who have labor jobs which are out there in the sun, who are construction workers, who are miners, for not miners, but yeah, who are construction workers, they may be having, say, a better level of sunlight, and therefore say good level of vitamin D, this is hypothetically speaking, versus office workers who 9 to 5 are say within closed environments, they have limited exposure to sunlight, and therefore they have, say, poorer vitamin D level. So when I was just looking at sunlight haywire, it was not really giving, it was not a strong predictor of blood vitamin D levels. But when I examined sunlight, amount of sunlight exposure within the context of type of occupation, this gave me much more meaningful finding. This is what I want to say. Good or bad model doesn't mean that you have collected the data inaccurately and everything is bad what you have done. No, it is not like that. It means that maybe there are other type of independent variables who may explain the relationship better, or maybe stronger predictors than just your simple amount of sunlight. Does that make sense, students? So I hope this is meaningful to you. This is what I mean by goodness of fit and you having a good model. It is to see that is the relationship, is the maximum amount of variance in your outcome variable explained by the predictors? If not, maybe there are other type of predictors which you haven't investigated, and maybe they have a more stronger relationship in explaining the outcome. Okay, so when I talk about predictor outcomes, think about the vitamin D example, your outcome being your blood vitamin D, and then your predictor being the n number of other variables. Okay, so maybe for instance, let's go a step back. If I were to do a linear regression with one predictor, this may be a really bad model, poor goodness of it, okay, just the amount of sunlight and blood vitamin D. But when I have all of these independent variable, maybe this is giving me a much more stronger picture. And with further investigation, I find out that, oh, hang on, there is one more factor, occupation, which is actually mediating the relationship between sunlight amount, exposure, and blood vitamin D. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to say. Okay, that good or bad model is in terms of the amount of variance which is explained in your outcome variable by the various predictors. Okay. All right. So now the second important theoretical concept is outliers. What are outliers? Those are dots or individual cases or participant IDs which are very, very far off than your line of regression. Okay. So all of these other dots are like somewhere like they are hovering around the line of regression, but there is one dot which is right on the top of the graph. Okay. Which is like billion years far away. Like, it is like light years far away from the line of regression, and then you wonder, why is this like so far off? Okay, and this is where it may be sometimes what may happen. For instance, this is say IQ versus MRI counts. Okay, and in you may find that accidentally for the IQ, instead of typing say 114, you have typed 140 as an IQ, and you're like, oh, hang on, this is like a super genius. And then you find out that when you were doing data entry, you accidentally typed 140 rather than say 104 or 114 or something like that. Okay. So that's why it is very important to investigate outliers. Some of the outliers may be extremely genuine. Like if I say that I have a class of 80 students and the average is 60 out of 100 is the marks. But then if I have this one student who has got say 99 out of 100, maybe that is not a typing mistake. Maybe the student is genuinely legit and has got really good marks. So good on that student. And that doesn't and as long as it is accurate, as long as that is real representation of the data in the real world, then you don't have to manipulate the model at all, because it is the reality. Okay. So this is what I'm saying. It is important to identify outliers, because sometimes they can be typing mistakes or technical say errors during your data entry stage. It could be actually genuine cases where you just have to justify in your discussion section that in our model we had this one case which was like really unique, and this was like true. The individual actually scored 99 out of 100. When you remove that one individual exceptional student, then you see the overall model is telling a similar trend. Okay, so basically you don't have to say. What you have to do is you have to remove that case and see what is the story of the model, include that case and what is the story of the model, and then you make a meaningful interpretation and you discuss it in your discussion. Okay, so that is the best practice. All right, so basically you're just informing the say the reviewers that this is the case, and when we remove, this is the story. So this one is an exceptional student. We haven't included him or her in the analysis because he's not showing a common trend, but the student is a genuine case and he actually has an IQ of 140 or marks out of 99 out of 100. Makes sense? Okay. So yes, but obviously there are certain outliers which are as they are. So then what do you do? How do you actually deal with outliers? What are the other various approaches of dealing with outliers when they are, say, genuine cases, not just the 99 out of 100, but there are, say, maybe it is heights of individual or maybe heights of adolescent. And then there are, say, 10 students in these class, and these are all 16-year-old, and maybe they are really really tall, like 185 centimeters or so. So they have had a growth spurt really early, and they are very very tall individuals. So those are again genuine cases. But to tell a homogenized story and to consider the variance or the error that they may be creating, therefore to address it appropriately, what you would report is standardized residuals. Okay, and in regression this is reported as beta values, and I'll show you where the beta values are and things. So when you have genuine outliers, you report it using beta values. Okay, and standardized residuals are always a best practice that you would be reporting in regression, because I have explained to you the term standardization, what it means. So standardization means that you can take this value and you can compare this value with the other standardized beta values published by other researchers in other papers using regression, and examining your similar sort of research question. Make sense? Okay. So that is why this is important. All right. So when you have outliers, the solution is to always report standardized residuals and standardized beta values. Okay, and the universal rule is that the standardized residual, the distribution lies between mean of 0 and standard deviation of 1. It's okay if you don't understand this. This is a more statistical contact in the context of it's more statistics, but for you to understand, just remember the practical thing that you would do is what I have already suggested over here. What I would do is I would remove those, say, one student, an exceptional student, 99 out of 100, or those 10 students who have a height of 185 centimeters and they are 16-year-old, say, female adolescent students. Okay. So I would remove those outliers, rerun the analysis, and see whether this changes the findings and the interpretations or if it does not. Okay. So this requires more statistical decisions, which are best taken in consultation with your supervisor. So yes, if I was working one-on-one with you for your PhD projects or so on and so forth, that is when you would sit down and you would actually discuss this in practice. In theory, all you need to understand and appreciate is that yes, there is a concept such as outliers. Outliers are those data points on your graphs which are way far away from the line of regression. They are not telling you a homogenized common story. So you need to investigate them further. Sometimes they could be just simple, say, typing and technical errors. Sometimes they could be genuine cases, irrespective of what the issue is. You would correct, obviously, for any technical errors. And then you would do an analysis with and without outliers to see what are the changes in the interpretation. All right. And how this is affiliated to your research objective. So the second component is done in discussion with your supervisor. All right. Okay. Then you have a concept which is called as influential cases. So what are influential cases? Influential cases may or may not be outliers. They may or may not influence the overall finding which you gather from the literature. So influential cases, basically for them to be called as influential cases, they need to be investigated further. All right. So just see this example. So more, it should be amount, sorry, not about. Oh, sorry, now you can just see my face. Sorry about that. Don't get scared. All right. Yep. Now you cannot see my big face on the screen. So I hope you're not scared. All right. So now more amount of time spent in sunlight. Okay. So more amount of time spent, more amount of time spent in sunlight, so on and so forth. Let me just share this with you again. Okay. Yep. I think you can see this only. Yes, you can. All right. Oh, my bad. Okay. So yes, let me read this out for you. More amount of time spent in sunlight, more is the vitamin D. Okay. So this is a positive association you are seeing. All right. But for all cases except case number 16. All right. So this is this participant ID number 16. And with this, you are actually seeing an inverse association that participant ID number 16 is spending a lot of time in sunlight, but still her say blood vitamin D levels are really low. Why is that the case? Because then you say, then when you go to the raw data which you have collected for the participant, you look at the questionnaire and the answers that she has given, then you find out, oh, hang on, she is applying sunscreen like say 7 times in a day, and which is like a really excessive amount. And maybe that is why her blood vitamin D levels are really low, even if her job requires her to be out in the sun almost all of the time. Okay, so maybe she's a lifeguard or something like that. Okay, so yes, so in this case, then what you would do, you would remove the participant case number 16, redo the analysis and see whether there is a significant change in the beta value. All right, so beta value with all case included is 0.38, but beta value with one case excluded, so the participant ID number 16 excluded, is 0.61, meaning for most of your population. So this could be say one participant, which is participant number 16, but maybe you have collected this data on 2000 people. So for 2000, so say 1999. So for all of these people, this is a true story, which is More amount of sunlight, more amount of blood vitamin D, less amount of sunlight, less amount of blood vitamin D. Only she is an exceptional case because of her lifestyle habits. Okay. So in this case, you have a very, very valid point to remove the case ID and redo the analysis, and to highlight in the discussion that you had one unique case who had this unique lifestyle practice of applying sunscreen 8 times in a day, all right, and excessive amounts. And that is why her blood vitamin D levels remain low, even if she was exposed to the sun for most of the time in the day. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is how this helps investigating influential cases, investigating outliers. It helps you to identify whether these cases should be included in the analysis, excluded in the analysis, do they require further investigation and discussion in the discussion section. All right. So because you cannot generalize what you saw for participant number 16, this one individual, for all of the rest of your population, 1999 people. Okay, you cannot generalize that one case to so many people. But if so many people are telling you a common story, then this needs to be reported. Why? Because this can then help to form future public health messages, advocacy messages, all right, and guidelines in the future. Because what is true for the common general average population is what is then advocated as health promotion messages. This is the function of epidemiology, right? To look at the good for the larger population for the benefit of the, say, larger, say, more individuals. If you had this one unique case, then you would be actually just reporting a case study, say, a research paper out of this, and you would be having unique specialized clinical consultation as a health professional with her. It would not be an epidemiological, say, issue. Okay, epidemiological issue is what is happening to the 1999 people. All right. So that is what epidemiology is, right? Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Sometimes also students, the influence of one case is so very much strong that this can become minus. So if you include this one case number, you may have minus 0.38. Okay, so meaning more sunlight, less vitamin D. All right, and this is influenced by this one single case. Okay, or maybe there may be such, say, if I'm talking about a data set of 2000, there may be, say, a handful of such, say, random cases which are changing the direction of your relationship. But is the direction of the relationship, which is inverse direction, more sunlight, less blood vitamin D, is this applicable to all of the rest of the population? And is it right to then tell all of the rest of the population that, oh, stop applying sunscreen because if you are applying sunscreen, your blood vitamin D levels are low? No, that would be an absolutely horrific health promotion message, which you should not do, right? This is the essence of deriving logical health promotion messages by looking at the overall wider trend which you're seeing in your data analysis, and therefore supporting evidence-based, say, best practices. Okay, so I hope this makes sense. All right, so how do you identify influential cases? So these are various things which you can identify. That is why I cannot go into the details of the actual nitty-gritty details of how do you do regression in SPSS. But of course, when you are learning how to do regression, meaning the actual manual functioning of regression, that is when in quantitative, say, research or statistics kind of a unit, they will actually tell you how do you calculate Mahalanobis distance, Cook distance, etc., in SPSS, and how do you get those values out. Okay, but from a theoretical point of view, I can give you a benchmark that once you learn how to calculate Mahalanobis distance in SPSS, then you have this reference indices, and you can check with these reference indices whether your, say, if you are having influential data points in your data set or not. And if you are having, then you can have a discussion with the supervisor regarding how best do you address them. Does that make sense? Okay, so have these reference benchmarks with you. So when you learn how to do proper regression in SPSS or any other software that you're using, you have something, a benchmark to compare your project result against. All right. So Mahalanobis distance, if you have a large sample size, which is, say, 500, n is equal to 500 or more than that, or else if you have 5 or more predictor, then a Mahalanobis distance value of less than 25, meaning you have no influential cases. Similarly, medium sample size, which is roughly around 100, and with or 3 predictors, less than 15, no influential cases. Small sample size, or you have 2 predictors, then less than 11, no influential cases. All right. So when you actually run regression in SPSS, I'll just keep saying SPSS because that is what we are using at UC. All right. So when I run regression in SPSS, and this I do for all of my research, whenever I do regression, then I check my Mahalanobis value number, which I have got out of SPSS, with these reference indices to see whether I have any influential cases or not. Okay. Then Cook's value should be less than 1. So all of these are, just be familiar with these terms, students, is because when someone teaches you in the other unit how to actually calculate this value, you know what these values stand for. These values are important indices to identify influential cases. Okay, so that is what you're doing. So you're not just randomly clicking buttons, which a convener is advising you to. You know the rationale behind why you're clicking these following buttons. Okay, so Cook's distance is, say, values less than 1, meaning no influential cases. Standardized DF beta less than 1, again. Covariance ratio, again, you have, they should be, say, close to 1, meaning no influential cases. Standardized DF fit, which is again less than 1. Studentized, this is not standardized. Okay, studentized residual less than 2. All right. And remember, once you start getting really good with statistics, you should be still a honest researcher. Okay, so because the more you learn how to do statistics, the more tempted you will be to manipulate your data, but don't do that. A good researcher uses these cutoffs as a guideline. Okay, it doesn't mean that once you identify what your outliers are, just to make your life easier, you just chuck off all of those outliers and you say, oh, I never had a sample size of 1,000. I always had a sample size of 1,560 people. Okay, no, don't do that. All right. You are not doing this to just get rid of those outliers or those influential cases and to make your life easier. No, you are a researcher. If you are having influential data points, you are trying to investigate, why do I have these cases which are having a very unique story, and they can actually add in a lot of wealth and richness to your discussion, okay, and make your story unique. All right. So it can actually become your selling point rather than to avoid having a or confronting this issue. Okay, so this will make more sense once you learn how to do these methods in SPSS and other softwares, and then you actually are dealing with influential cases in a real life. Okay, but don't take this as a strategy of just making your life easier and chucking data out. That is not what a true researcher does. You are doing research to benefit the wider community in some way or the other. So let's do it with integrity. Okay, all right. All right, so now let's go on to the, now I have explained to you all of the main key fundamental terminologies, which are very, very important before you understand the assumptions of regression. Okay, so now if somebody tells you goodness of it, you know what it means. Say influential data points, outliers, you know all of these terms and what they mean. Okay, so now remember, regression essentially principally is a parametric test. Like how you have your Pearson's correlation, which is a parametric test, and your independent sample t-test. Similarly, regression is a parametric test. So for you to use your data set, if you want to do regression on your data set, you have to make sure that your data is normally distributed. Okay, so yes, that is your assumption number 3, that your data should be normally distributed. If it is not normally distributed, doesn't mean you cannot run regression. There are ways to it, and we'll look at that in the coming slides. Okay, so the one thing very important, parametric test, therefore your data should be normally distributed. Then you have independence of observation. What does this mean? It means your data set is, say, a cross-sectional snapshot, meaning each of your participant is measured at only one time point. Okay, so you went to a school and you measured the, say, heights of all, say, school children once. All right, but if you have, say, or if you have taken dietary data from every individual 3 times, meaning you are reporting 3 dietary data for one individual. Okay, now this is called as repeated measures. All right, So regression is not the right model to use for repeated measures. You have something which is called as repeated measures analysis, generalized linear models. That is where you would be dealing with data where one individual is measured several number of times, okay, at week 3, week 6, week 12, after 2 years, something like that. All right, if that is the case, do not use regression, linear regression per se. You have other models which deals with repeated measures. In regression, you should be having independence of observation. All participants measured only once. Okay, so data collected only once. So one number you're reporting, age at one time point. Okay. Then you have linearity. What is linearity? It means that your dependent variable should be continuous in nature. All right, that is very, very important. As I said, IV, your independent variable can be continuous, categorical, both, which is totally fine. Your DV has to be continuous in nature. All right, for linear regression. All right, so as for binary logistic regression, your DV has to be bicategorical in nature in this way. All right. Then you have homogeneity of variance. What it means, we'll discuss further, and multicollinearity. So these 5 assumptions are very, very important and they need to be met before you proceed further in actually doing regression in real life. All right. Okay, so now this is just I have taken a mock say dataset example, and I have taken multiple dataset example because regression is a technique which I use in almost all of my papers. Okay, so I have multiple examples from various data sets. So this is just an SPSS output for descriptive purposes. So this is reporting mother's age in years. Okay, so you have the mean mother's age, which is the mother is, say, on an average, mothers in this sample are 26 years old, okay, 26.80. Then you have the median, 26.50. All right, and then you have the skewness and the kurtosis. Why am I highlighting all of this? Because what we are going to study in the coming slides, these values are of importance, okay? So I'll be using the mean value, median value, I'll be using the skewness and the kurtosis value. I'll also be using the minimum and the maximum ranges. So the youngest mother in this sample was 20 years and the oldest mother in this sample was 35 years of age. Okay. All right. So now the first important assumption, as I said, was normal distribution. All right. So how do you check whether your data is normally distributed or not? Okay. So these are a few strategies which I use for checking if my data is normally distributed or not. Okay. So firstly, step 1 is you have to calculate the mean, median, standard deviation, minimum, maximum, skewness, kurtosis of your continuous variable. So in the earlier slide, this is what we have already calculated. This is my variable mother's age. I want to check whether my variable mother's age, which is a continuous variable, because when you are talking about distribution, it is only applicable if your data is continuous in nature. So yes, for my mother's age, which is a continuous variable, I want to check whether this data is normally distributed or not. All right. So I have calculated all of these things which I told you in the this slide, mean, median, all of that. Okay. Now check, now pay attention. All right. So now check if the mean is within plus minus 10% of the median value. All right. So mother's age median was 26.50 years and mother's mean age was 26.80 years. All right. So I want to check whether these two values are within 10% of each other. All right. So how do I do that? I just say do it. I just try to find the percentage out of it. So it's a simple maths. You have your median into 100 divided by your mean, which is gives you 98.88. You minus this from 100. So now you know that the mean is only 1.12% different than the median. Okay, so there is not much difference between 26.50 and 26.80. Okay, and therefore the mean is only 1.12% different from the median. Therefore, the variable is normally distributed. If it was more than, say, if it crosses 10% and there are some. So, for example, in some cases, you may have median as, say, 26.50 and your mean could be, say, 36.71. Okay. So, this would then be more than 10% of difference between the mean and the median. And in this case, this is a red flag that your data may not be normally distributed. Mother's age is not normally distributed. Okay. So that could be the case. So I hope this makes sense. All right. So first thing to check is whether your mean is within 10% range of your median. All right. Then second is the skewness and kurtosis within again plus 3 standard deviation 3 points. So it is plus 3 standard deviation. Okay, but I use points as word because it's easier for students to understand. So see, I have made an asterisk and I have put it over here for you. The value 3 is taken from the fact that normally distributed data, 99.9% of the data falls within plus 3 standard deviation, okay, or Z score. So if you look at the normal distribution bell curve, you see 0 over here, central tendency, then you see 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, okay, which are your Z scores, all right? So majority of your data, all right, for normal distribution, because all of them are trying to tell a homogeneous trend, okay, that is normal distribution. So for the majority of your data should fall between 3 standard deviations, okay, plus minus 3 standard deviations. All right, and therefore I use the word 3 point, just that it is easier for students to understand, but technically this means 3 plus minus 3 standard deviations or Z scores. All right, so mother's age, the skewness which was there in the earlier table was 0.274. Standard error of skewness was 0.198. So let me just show you if you're confused. This is your skewness 0.274. This is 0.198 standard error. Okay, this is what I have taken. Yep, this is where we are. I divide skewness with its standard error. I get an answer of 1.38. The answer is less or equal to 3, which means it's all good. The mother's age is normally distributed. Okay, so this is second confirmation that my skewness is within the difference between the skewness and its standard error is not much. Okay, it is within 3 standard deviations, meaning the data is normally distributed. Okay. So then is the mean value within plus 3 points of the minimum and maximum value. Okay, again, this is very simple. You know, the mother's mean age is 26.80. If you remember, the youngest mother was 20 years and the oldest mother was 35 years. So you just divide your mean with the youngest mother age, mean with the oldest mother age. Both of these numbers are less than 3 points, okay, or the number 3, just to make it easier for students who find maths confusing. All right, so therefore the variable is again normally distributed. Does this make sense? I hope this is really easy because I was very fortunate, students, that actually I didn't find this say in any random textbook. This was explained to us when I was doing my PhD. We had an invited biostatistician, and this was there in all of her reference notes. Okay, so I have still saved those notes and these valuable things that I learned from her, which you have to search 10 textbooks to get this information out. She gave it all to us, within that, say, 1 hour of workshop. And I couldn't be more grateful because I still use her findings and I always acknowledge her whenever I teach this, because if it was not for her, to find the same information would not be impossible. It is there in textbook, but you have to read a lot between fine lines, which I have, but to save you time, it's all summarized in these slides. Okay, so it's a very fortunate thing that even before doing a PhD or anything, you're learning these, say, fine tuning techniques, which makes your life much more easier. You don't have to waste time when you actually have your own data set in front of you for research, when you are working as a clinical researcher or so on and so forth. Okay, so it's good to have these all reference indicators. So save these slides if you want to, because they will be very useful for your future. All right, the last thing which I do is check the distribution of the histogram. How does the histogram appear? If it appears something like this, then yes, normally distributed. If it is skewed, as you had learned about this, then it is not normally distributed. If you have a, say, bimodal distribution, and we talk more about that when we are learning about graphs, then you still have to investigate whether bimodal distribution is normally distributed or not. You can also check your distribution via PP plots, QQ plots, and all of those types of various graphical representation we will be looking at in the coming lectures and tutorials. Okay, but there are various other ways of checking for normality. All right, and all of those ways I have covered earlier with means, medians, skewness, standard errors, all of that. Okay, so I hope all this is making sense now. All right, so this is how you check for normal distribution. Oh yes, there is one more method of checking for normal distribution. So you have the KSSW test. Please don't ask me to pronounce these. Anyways, with my accent, this sound ridiculously funny when I try to pronounce these. So yeah, I know it's good to laugh, but it's embarrassing the way I pronounce it. So I will not pronounce it. Okay, so let's just call these KS and SW. All right, so this always remember the one reference thing is that SW is more sensitive than KS. Okay, so therefore, if your KS at times may fail to detect a normality, okay, they may miss out on something because SW is much more robust. Even if your KS say is greater than 0.05, all right, please check for your SW test. Okay, so I always look at both of the tests. If my KS says no, all is good and your data is normally distributed, I confirm this by checking the SW column, because if SW says that my data is normally distributed, then yes, it is supposed to be right in most cases. But do remember, and this is a cautionary note, KS and SW tests, they are best used for small data sets. Okay, when you have very large data set, even a minor say tweak can give you say errors, and it may say that your data is not normally distributed, which may not be the case. When you have very large sample size, you always do all of the other procedures also, which is how is the mean situated with the median, what is the difference between the skewness and the standard of error. I do all of that to confirm, and when I have multiple things telling me the same story, then I just do not rely on the KS and SW test. Okay, KS and SW test, they are good for smaller sample size. Anything within 100, yep, it is good. Roughly speaking, smaller, technically strictly smaller is say something which is around 30. All right, but in my personal experience, when I have sample size of 100, they still kind of give accurate findings. But my thumb of rule is I do not just rely on KSSW test. Even if it is a small data set, I run all of the other steps which are there to identify normal distribution, not just relying on KS and SW. Okay. All right, so yes, this do not always depend on this test for larger samples. So I've highlighted this, so please do not. If the test is significant, means the distribution is not normal. Okay, so if you have significant results in this, P is less than 0.05, meaning your data is not normally distributed. And then you may think about, say, transforming the data using non-parametric tests, so on and so forth. Okay, but yes, I hope this makes sense, students. So please don't just rely on this test as best practice, and my personal advice would be to use the other techniques plus this technique, irrespective of the sample size. And yes, if your sample size is big, absolutely do not just rely on this test. Okay. All right. So this is how KS and SW test looks when you do SPSS. So this is your KS and this is your SW test. If you see, the sample size over here is say 150. Okay, this is your, and it looks pretty normal over here, right? If you look at the QQ plot, the dots are really close to the model fit line. All right. So they look pretty normally distributed. But look at this. Look at this over here. KS test is telling you that this is a significant number. All right. And SW is also telling you that this is a significant number. Just by looking at this number, you would become apprehensive and you would think, oh, mother's age is not normally distributed because KS and SW test are significant. Your sample size is not incredibly big. All right. It is 150. All right. It is not that incredibly big, but it is still telling you that this is not normally distributed, mother's age. I would do QQ plots. I would do histograms. I would check the mean and median, the difference between the both. I would see the deviation for skewness and standard errors. I would do all of that. And if everything else is telling me that my data is normally distributed, I would not say worry about KS and SW tests, because they are anyway suited for very small samples. Okay. But yes, till 100, I haven't found say issues with this, but it is a test, but don't just use it at its face value. Okay, so this is another hypothetical example. These are all hypothetical examples. Okay, so now you have a small sample size. You just have 29, say, mother's age. All right, 29 mothers in your sample, and you are again looking at mother's age. All right, and over here, if you see, this test is say non-significant. Okay, So when you have non-significant, what does it mean? That the data is normally distributed. All right. And the QQ plot is also not that bad. All of the dots are pretty close to the, say, a model fit line. All right. So yes, for a smaller sample size, this could be much more accurate, but for larger sample size, it may give you errors. All right. So always with normality, the thumb of rule is use multiple testing techniques. Don't just rely on one thing. Okay. All right. So yes, for larger sample size, KSSW test shows that the data is not normal. We saw that earlier with sample size of 150. But when you look at the QQ plots, which we did see, it appears to be normal. Okay. So this is just the, again, you know how this may be really new concepts to a lot of you. So I have just written down whatever I have said. Okay, in addition, when you check the earlier steps to assess normality, the variable mother's age appears to be normal. Okay, because when you check the difference between the mean and the median and all of that, it appears to be normal. Okay, so therefore, do not rely on KS test for larger data. Use other kind of say testing techniques as well. All right. In addition, what you have to remember is when you're comparing, say, two or more groups on continuous data. So, for instance, I have mother's age, and my mothers are ranging from 20 to say 35 years of age, right? If I divide the mothers into young mothers and then older mothers, say 20 to 30 years, and then say 26 to, it should be 35 years over here. Okay. But yes, if I divide the mothers into two groups, I would test the normality for both of these groups. I would just not assume it for the overall mother's age. Okay. So I would run the normality testing for younger mothers age group and older mother's age group. All right. That is what I want to say. Study the normality for those specific groups rather than the variable as a whole. All right. Okay. So again, so let me just oh, again, you can just see my uh, face on the screen, right? Sorry, I don't want to scare you. I just want to correct this over here, 35, because you have been following the same example for understanding normality. So if you have consistent, say, written things, even if they are hypothetical, it makes interpretation easier for you. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly correct that. All right. Okay, so yep, so your mothers over here should be, hang on, it should be 20 to 30. If you're taking, this should be say 31 to 35. All right, so this is again, it's just a hypothetical example. It's not really true. All right, so, but I hope you understand this and I hope it all makes sense. Okay, so yes, this is a potential solution which is very, very commonly used when you're dealing with not normally distributed data. As I said that one of the most commonly used multivariate analytical technique is regression. Regression is essentially a parametric test. So if your data is not normally distributed, you have to make it to a normal distribution or as close as possible to a normal distribution. Okay, how do you do that? You do transformations. Okay, so you do transformations when your data is not normally distributed, and transformation, it helps to get your data closer to normal distribution. It helps to make it more normally distributed. And this in technical terms means have equal variance between the mean and the data point. Okay, so the mean, the central tendency, and the data point equal variance, meaning they are all kind of homogeneously gathered around the central line. Okay, so when this is the case, then your homogeneity of variance assumption is met. HV, that is what it means. Homogeneity of various assumptions, we are going to look at it, so don't worry. All right. The other thing which you have to remember about transformations, in cross-sectional studies, you transform only the not normal variables. Okay. But when you're having longitudinal studies or repeated measure studies, all right, for any, say, analytical, um, an analytical technique that you are using or statistical technique that you are using, regression or generalized linear models or so on and so forth. Okay, whenever you have repeated measures or longitudinal analysis where you're measuring the participant at 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, so on and so forth, when one participant is measured many number of times, all variables related to the not normal variable should be transformed. Meaning weight of the participant, you have to transform at 3 months and at 6 months and at 12 months. You cannot just transform variable at 12 months because that was not normally distributed and everything else is in its own form. No. because this has mathematical connotations as to why, if you choose to transform one variable, all variables which are associated with this variable at time point 3, 6, and 8 should be transformed. So it has mathematical connotations. I won't go into that because that's a pure mathematical class. Okay, but this is just for you to remember. When you do transformations for repeated measures, you transform all of the variables in that one sector. Okay. Now there are various types of transformations. You have log transformations, you have square root transformations. There are in total, say roughly 4 types of transformation, the most common types. Okay. If you choose log transformations, for example, one of the type, you use log transformation for all of the variables which are not normally distributed in your data set. Okay. You do not do, say, one variable log transform, one variable is square root transform. Don't do that. Use the same transformation technique for all of your not normally distributed variable. All right. And how do you do transformations? You can do it in SPSS. And it is very simple to do it in SPSS. Again, that is part of quantitative statistics, where somebody actually teaches you how to do log transformations or any other type of transformation, square root and so on and so forth. Okay, so it is not, say, within the scope of this unit for me to teach you on how to you log transform. All right, and do remember, with log transformations, then you have to back transform the variables to have meaningful interpretations and to report it in your results. Therefore, you may use weighed means. Just remember these terms, because these terms will be used by your convener and your expert when they teach you how to log transform in another unit. Okay, so remember terms such as, there are different types of transformations such as log transformation, square root transformation. You have to back transform variables once you log transform them or use any other transformation. This back transformation requires reporting of something which is called as weighed means. So yes, so these are the concepts which are more hands-on, like, where I actually have to click buttons and show you how to do it and show you Excel calculations. So that is part of quantitative research statistics, and hopefully you will learn those in your other unit. Okay, but I hope understanding the theory is helping you a lot. So you have some idea and awareness as to what is regression, what is involved in regression. So you can make an informed choice as to whether this is the right statistical technique for you for your data set. Okay. So yes, again, this is one of my best practice, and it's not just mine. Researchers do this best practice. Once you transform your data, you run the analysis, and then when you and then check this data with the data which was not transformed. Okay, so the original data as it is, run the analysis, transform the variables, then run the analysis and check whether the findings are considerably different. All right. So in several cases, with me personally, when I have published papers, I have done transformations, and then I have also done the same analysis using the original data, and there are like no differences. There are like, say, decimal point differences. It is not changing the story. It is not changing the pattern of the association or the direction of the association. It is not making an impact on the effect size. If that is the case, meaning the data really does not have, the data not being normally distributed does not really have an influence on the overall pattern, the story of your paper. Okay, and in this case, it is then okay for you to proceed with original data and use it as it is. Okay, so yep, I hope that is helpful. Now you have the concept of homogeneity of variance. Homogeneity of variance is, say, kind of similar to goodness of fit. What was goodness of fit? The more closer the dots are to the line of regression, the better is the model, right? So homogeneity of variance is telling the same story. Okay, see this. Homogeneity of variance follows the concept of modeling, and modeling is nothing but goodness of fit. Okay, modeling in relation to the mean. Your mean is, for instance, your central tendency or line of regression. All right, which is also called as your reference or your constant. Okay, so it's like having so many pet names for this one individual. All right, so like I have, for instance, I have a couple of pet names that my parents call me with and things. So it's like I'm still the same individual. You know me as Rati, but when my parents call me with another name, I'm still the same person. Okay, it's same like that. Modeling, goodness of fit, reference line, constant, central tendency in regression, all of that is referring to that one line and the dots, the orientation of the dots around that one line. Okay. So yes, homogeneity of variance is applicable to variables which are not dependent on each other. Okay. Again, this is important, meaning you are measuring each individual just one time in your study. If you have measurements at 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, homogeneity of variance is not applicable. And as you may appreciate, regression in itself is not applicable. You have to do repeated measures analysis and something like that. Okay. So, yep, then you have the individual participant observations or data points. Now I'm talking about those red dots, which you saw in that graph, which were across that line, those red dots. Okay. So the individual data point should be close to the mean. Okay. Meaning your central line, your constant, and all of those names. All right. So which means you have low dispersion. All right. So this concept I have covered like 200 times from the time I have started showing you the application of epidemiology in data sets. Okay. So yes, the closer the dots are to your line of regression, this is your line of regression. The closer the dot is, the better is the model, more goodness of fit, less dispersion, less error, all right, less residual error, which is a good thing. Okay. And if that is the case, the closer the dots are to the line of regression, meaning you have fulfilled the homogeneity of variance assumption, and therefore you can conduct regression. All right. And if the points are really highly dispersed, okay, the first thing which you do is check for outliers, check for influential data points. And still, if you feel that all of these are genuine cases, these are legitimate cases, I should not remove these outliers from the or influential data points from the study, because it is not telling you the true story of what you see in the actual community. Then what you do is you use weighted least square methods of regression. Okay, so again, how do you do that in SPSS? Not within the scope of this unit, but if your homogeneity of variance assumption is not completely met, then the type of regression you do is weighted least square measures of regression. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I may have added a video to show you how this is done. Oh yes, I'm so sorry, students, like this is maybe the third time, right, where you're seeing my big face on the screen, right? Which is, I know it could be a bit disturbing. Oh, suddenly she is becoming big. All right, so sorry about that. But there's a lot of back and forth, but I just want to make sure that you get the maximum out of this lecture. So if you look at this YouTube video teaches you how to do regression using weighted least square measures. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to point you to that. All right. Okay, so how about I'll just teach you like this, because there is not much on the slide. So you won't then have to see me suddenly becoming big on your screen. Okay. So yes, detecting the homogeneity of variance in SPSS. How do you detect homogeneity of variance in SPSS? All right. In SPSS, this is done by Levien's test. So if Levien's test is significant, which is less than 0.05, then homogeneity of variance assumption is not met, and vice versa. Okay. Again, Levien's test, even a small deviation in large data set can give you significant results. Okay, so the best thing is to not use Levien's test for large samples. All right, you actually do a scatter plot and check whether you have a lot of data which are just scattered all over the place, like you know how you were doing influential data points. So check like that, see visually a scatter plot, and then see whether this is something which you need to address using weighted least square measure, meaning do you have to run regression using weighted least square measures. All right, but yeah, otherwise for smaller data sets, Levien's test will give you accurate findings. All right, so this is just, so basically the other method of detecting homogeneity of variance in SPSS, and this is how I was telling you, you know, you do scatter plots. So basically this is how you do scatter plots. So you plot standardized predicted values, which is called as Z spread, against standardized residuals or error values, which is called as ZRESID, okay, residual. All right, so again, students, very difficult for me to show you how this is done in SPSS, but of course, if you're doing quantitative unit, you will be learning all of this. So basically, when you are clicking those buttons in regression to run regression, there are few buttons which you can click, And then you will get these values. Okay, you will get these values in SPSS, and basically you just have to plot them. Okay, and once you plot them, then you can see how your data points are looking. If your data points are looking like this, which is this is the line of regression and they are all around the line of regression, this is meeting the homogeneity of variance, no problem. If they have this triangular thing, okay, meaning there is a heterodiscosity. Okay, so heterodiscosity meaning it is not meeting homogeneity of variance. Then if they have this boomerang sort of a shape, again not meeting the homogeneity of variance. If they have this inverted boomerang sort of a shape, again this is not meeting homogeneity of variance. All right, so this is how, when you plot these say uh, these residual values, that is when you come to know whether you're meeting homogeneity of variance or not. Like, it helps you to visually detect. Okay, so as I said, Levian's test is good for small samples, but if you do this, this is also applicable for large samples. You can plot this value and you can make inferences whether you are meeting or not meeting homogeneity of variance, and therefore what is the next step which you have to do, all right, using weighted least squares or not. All right. Then there is a concept of multicollinearity. Now, this concept is only applicable when you have more than one independent variable to deal with. Okay, so you know how I showed you an example where you had say amount of sunlight, and then you had say dietary intake of vitamin D, and then you had fat soluble, so meaning fat intake in your diet. Okay, so you had all of these couple of say independent variables. So yes, when you have more than one independent variable, then the concept of multicollinearity is very important. What you're trying to see in multicollinearity is that your independent variables, okay, this sunlight and vitamin D intake and this fat intake, they are not very strongly correlated to each other. Okay, and why is that so? Okay, why do you do not want a very strong correlation between your independent variable? Why do I keep doing this? Is because when you are doing regression, you have your IVs on this side and then you have your DVs at the bottom. That is how it is reported. So after doing regression for like bajillion years, I've started showing this, like, you know, my IVs are over here. So don't find it random, but once you start doing regression a lot, you may have your own signalings. Okay. So yes, so you do not want a strong correlation between your IVs. All right. Why? Because this will weaken your effect size. All right. So the association which you want to see between your IV and your DVs, okay, the effect size may be weakened. There may be more variance or more error. All right. Um, and what may happen is you will not know whether sunlight is the one which is having the maximum impact on, say, blood vitamin D levels, or is it diet which is having the maximum impact on blood vitamin D levels, or is it something else? Okay, so you're not sure which IV is most influential in explaining your DV. Okay, so if they are highly multicollinear, it means your data is being quite redundant. You're trying to capture similar information, but you are just bifurcating the variables a lot. Okay, so screening for multicollinearity is important. And how do you do that? You screen for it via variance inflation factor. Okay, so again, these are a few buttons you click and then you get variance inflation factor in SPSS. So now the cutoff is that the average variance inflation factor should be less than 1. The variance inflation factor, the tolerance, again, it says a button click, should be greater than 2.0. It is in this, it is just good for you to know the reference cutoff. So when you learn how to do it in real life, then you have a benchmark to compare against. Okay, so this means no multicollinearity. Some papers, yes, they argue that the VIF less than 10 is okay, and others say a limit of 5 is all right. What I do as a best practice, I see what is the most commonly acceptable VIF in my faculty, in my discipline, and I go by that. All right. So you can make the same sort of decision making with your supervisor. What is the one which is working in your area of research, and you stick to that VIF. All right. Because then you have evidence to show this is what is reported in your area of research. Then you have autocorrelation. So what is autocorrelation? It is for any two observations or cases, they're residual. Okay, so for any two, say, those participants which you had, those red dots, okay, and the distance between the red dot and the line of regression, that was residual or error. Okay, so this is that. So for any two observations or cases, their residual, meaning the distance between those dots and the line of regression, should be uncorrelated. Okay, we do not want, say, correlation between the participants. We do not want correlation, say, between their residuals as well. Okay, so if residuals are correlated, this is called autocorrelation. So how do you check for autocorrelation? You check it using another button click test, Durbin-Watson. Okay, so again, values of 2 meaning no autocorrelation, values greater than 2 to 4 negative correlation, 0 to less than 2 a positive correlation, overall values less than 1 and more than 3 are a cause of concern. Okay, so between 1 to 3 it is still possible. All right, so it is still possible when it is between that. Now, how to do regression in SPSS? I have given you a few introductory videos. One is for multiple regression, meaning having more than one independent variable. And another one is for that simple regression between just one independent variable. So please do look at those YouTube videos. And yep. So over here, this is just all, say, a revision again. So regression association between IVs and DVs, or IV and DV. DV is always continuous. IV can be continuous or categorical. Regression does all of the mathematical calculation to form your line of regression. And then you need to assess the goodness of fit. As I said, less residual, better goodness of fit, more residual, bad goodness of fit. Okay. And then basically, this is how, for C, I just wanted to show you dependent variable vitamin D log transformed. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that in regression, when you do regression, you can also make such plot. So this is the association between vitamin D, which is blood levels of vitamin D, and my vitamin D was log transformed because it was in this paper, it was not normally distributed. And when I did an analysis with log transform and original data, it actually had an impact. It was considerably influencing the finding. So I used log transform vitamin D. Okay, so vitamin D log transformed, and then this was it was in connection with the SCI, meaning socioeconomic indices. All right. So what it said, that more rich the individual, more their blood vitamin D levels. Okay, so it was a positive relation which was seen. All right, and mother's weight status and vitamin D, there was no significant relationship between that. Now, if you see, this is your line of regression. These are all of your data points. All right, and homogeneity of variance. As I said, you would have to plot the residuals for this to check. So all of that was done before doing regression. All right, so basically, I just wanted to show you that you can get descriptives when you do regression, basic descriptives such as means and standard deviations. You can actually have graphical plots such as these scatter plots when you do regression. So your regression can give you scatter plots to show association between your IV and your DV. Okay, and this is model summary which is produced when you do regression. So the most important values I'll highlight for you are your say R square, adjusted R square. So basically adjusted R square, it tells you the total amount of variance that is explained by your independent variables for your predicting variable, for your outcome variable. Okay, so this is, say, all of the variables, your independent variables together, it is explaining 36.2%. If I were to convert this into percentage, it would be 36.2% of variance is explained for the outcome variable by the predicting variable. So my dependent variable over here, this is another example now, is fruit and vegetable intake. Okay, and my predicting variables are child's age, child's gender, a child's fussy eating behavior, child's emotional eating behavior, meaning when the child is sad or happy or angry, the child is eating more. Emotional, hang on, this is emotional under eating. So when the child is happy, angry, or sad, the child is eating less. Okay, and then enjoyment of food, food satiety, food responsiveness. So basically, guys, it's as students from other faculty, you don't need to know what each and every independent variable means over here. Basically, I'm measuring children's eating behavior, and I'm seeing whether children's eating behavior, their emotional and their say their psychosocial behavioral, their nature is having an influence on their actual fruit and vegetable intake. Is that simple enough? Okay, so is behavior having an impact on the child's actual fruit and vegetable intake. That is what is measured. All right. So all of these variables together, age, gender, and all these eating behaviors together are explaining 36.2% of variance, all right, for the fruit and vegetable intake. Okay, meaning there are many, many other independent variables out there in the real life scenario, which I haven't captured, which are explaining all the other remaining variance in the outcome variable, which is your fruit and vegetable intake. All right. But all these current independent variables together are explaining 36% of the variance in your outcome. Variance meaning these independent variable together are why is the child's fruit and vegetable intake low or high? These variables are accounting for 36% of the reasoning. Okay, does that make sense? Wow, that was so hard to say actually, to put it into such simple colloquial terms. All right, sorry, I just felt like giving a pat on my back because that was really hard. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Is that 36.2% of the reasoning as to why children are having less fruit and vegetable intake is because of their eating behaviors and because of their age, because of their gender, so on and so forth. So that is what it means in simple terms. Okay. So that is what adjusted R square stands for. R square change is when you are adding, because I have done hierarchical linear regression in this. So when you are adding another set of variable, then what is happening, like, means the change in, say, model 1 and model 2. Again, what is model 1, model 2? Guys, all this will be explained. See, the working of regression will only be explained when you're actually doing regression in a computer lab in practice on hands. Okay, so this is very difficult for me to go through all of this, but yes, if I were to teach you quantitative statistics, then I would be going through each and every item in this table. Okay, but I have just highlighted the red color values for you over your students, is because just make sure that these are the ones which you have to report when you are, say, reporting regression for your research projects. Okay. So yeah, but this is your overall significance, your model significance. You remember Durbin-Watson, which was your test for autocorrelation. This is that. The answer is 1.6, which is between 1 and 3. So I still pass. If not, it would suggest autocorrelation. Okay. So I hope this makes sense. And then you have an ANOVA test. ANOVA, you don't do an ANOVA separately. This automatically comes when you do regression. And these values are of importance over here. This is again that your overall model is significant, meaning when all of these variables are together, they have a significant impact on the child's fruit and vegetable intake. Okay, all of these things together, they have a significant impact on the child's fruit and vegetable intake. Then over here, this is what is produced again. You know how you had, when you learned Pearson's correlation, you were reporting R values and the P value. In regression, you report the beta value, which are your standardized value. Okay. So again, standardized value important because you can compare it across papers. All right. So you report standardized coefficients, which is your beta value, and your P value, which is your significance. Okay. And if you see over here, collinearity statistics, if we learned about the tolerance and the variance inflation factor for multicollinearity, this is it. Okay, so this is the statistics for that. All right, so now you have significance over here. This is significant. And look at the relationship, it is negative. Negative meaning, what does it mean? If the child is more fussy or more picky, the child is less likely to consume fruit and vegetable. Okay, so that is what it means, the child's behavior. Okay, if the child has a behavior which is more fussy and picky, less fruit and vegetable intake. And this relationship is significant, as you can see. And your beta value is just like your R value. All right, so that is how, that is the connotation for it. And these are the two important rows, the most basic rows which you would need to report your regression. And students, this is just an FYI. This is a table out of one of my publications to show you that first I do a Pearson's correlation, which is called unadjusted, which is just a, say, association between each and every single, say, independent variable. These are my independent variables: enjoyment of food, satiety, responsiveness, emotional undereating, and fussiness. Okay. So all of these are you do a bivariate analysis between your independent variable and your outcome variable, which is your fruit and vegetable intake. Okay, that is your unadjusted one, your R value being your Pearson's correlation. Okay, then you do an adjusted, say, association. Adjusted association is also called as a multivariate association because I'm adjusting for age and gender. Okay, which you saw in the earlier table. All right, so you know how I showed you over here age and gender, this one. All right, age and gender. So I'm adjusting for those covariates. Okay, so I adjusted for covariates, age and gender, and then I want to see the relationship of these independent variable to the child's actual fruit and vegetable intake, and only this relationship was significant, and which I explained earlier, fussiness. Okay, more fussy the child, less fruit and vegetable intake. This is what it means. Then in step 2, this is what I have already told you. Delta R square is change in R square, and these are the numbers which you have to take from the table, and these numbers are all highlighted in red color over here for you. Okay, so you can look at these numbers and you can see where they have been added in this. So basically, in very brief terms, I told you the main thing what this number means, what is the essence of it. The change in R square or your R square adjusted means, which was 0.36. If you remember, what this means was that the total amount of explanation of these independent variable is 36.2% for your outcome variable, which is fruit and vegetable intake, right? So that is what your adjusted R square means. Your overall model is significant, meaning these variables together, they have a significant, say, impact on the child's fruit and vegetable intake. So your overall model is significant. So I have told you the very, very big key overall broad parameters for this. All right. But yes, the further detailing of it, you would be learning in quantitative statistics. Okay. So now how do you write linear regression? The writing style is, students, it is very, very similar to you writing Pearson's correlation. Okay, for instance, higher mean scores for fussiness were correlated with lower mean scores for fruit and vegetable intake. Okay, so again, mean scores, why have I said? Because it was continuous variables and we had calculated mean scores for fussiness. So yes, so higher mean scores for fussiness was correlated with lower mean score, and if you say higher, lower, and this shows the sign, your beta value and your p value. So the writing is very, very simple. It is not at all rocket science. Okay, so now what I have done for you students as part of this tutorial is you have an activity to practice. If you already have the data, if you have your own data set, fantastic, you can use your own data set to practice regression. All right, if it is appropriate to use regression in your data set. If not, I have created a practice data set for you, which is available on Canvas for you to practice linear regression. Let me just show this data set to you. So just bear with me. Just a minute. Yeah. No, I shared my original file with you, which has a lot of variables. I don't want to scare you with that file. This is what is available on your Canvas. Okay. So, and of course, see, this is, say, completely at your discretion. Not all of you have SPSS. So if you do not have SPSS, you can just download the, say, 14 days free version of SPSS, which you just get via Google. You go to SPSS IBM statistics and you can get a 14 days free version to download for your practice, and you can do that. If you do not want to do that, it is up to you. If and on university computers in University of Canberra, students who are say on campus, you can do it on university computers as well. But otherwise, for others, you can say download the free 14 days version of SPSS and you can use it for practice. Of course, again, this activity is not marked, it is not mandatory. So it is your choice whether you want to practice regression or not. Okay. So just for your ease, to make it easy for you, I have highlighted it over here for you that you have covariates, which are age and gender. Then you have your independent variable and you have two independent variables. So you're running multiple regression. Okay, fussiness and fruit and vegetable intake. Okay, so you don't have all the other variables which I had in my actual research paper, you know, that emotional undereating and all of that, you don't have that. Then you have your outcome variable over here, which is BMI Z scores, the child's weight status. Okay, that is your dependent variable. All of your independent variable are continuous in nature. Your dependent variable is continuous in nature. Okay. Very, very simplistically, how do you run regression? As I said, the details of it, please don't take this as a face value. To actually learn properly how do you do regression, you need to look at, say, advanced, say, YouTube videos, read textbooks, or else if you are enrolled in quantitative research statistics, then don't worry. All of that will be covered in that unit. But in just simplistic terms, it is analysis, and then you go to regression. I'll just show you the very basics, but please don't take this as the final thing. Okay. Regression, then you go to linear. All right, then I have entered this over here. Dependent variable should be over here. Child's weight status, BMI, Z score. Then I have in the first model set, I'm running something which is called as hierarchical linear regression. Okay, using just the normal entry method. You even have stepwise method and so on and so forth. And these are the things which I'm telling you, students, is taught in actual quantitative class, and that's why I cannot cover all of this. It's not within the scope of this. For me, it is to teach you the fundamentals of what is regression, what are the parameters which are important, assumptions which are important. You should be confident in understanding if regression is an applicable technique for you or not for your epidemiological data set. That is the function of this unit, which has been covered well. All right. So yes, I'm running hierarchical linear regression with the normal entry method. And the next step is where I add my independent variables. Then the statistics which I want to do is model fit, R-square change, collinearity diagnostic. All of this, what it means is part of another unit. Estimates, confidence interval. I want to do Durbin-Watson as well. I'm not plotting anything, but do you see these terms? These terms were explained to you in your PowerPoint slides. Okay. So these are the things which you plot. All right, to identify your, say, your homogeneity of variance. Okay, these are the things which you need for to plot. All right, and then but yeah, I'm not doing any plottings. All right, and options, I'm just seeing if there is anything other quick which I can show you. Yes, these are the residuals. You know how I spoke about standardized residuals, studentized residuals, all of this. So it is over here. Cook's distance and Mahanubal's distance, I even spoke about that. All right, so that is over here. Your leverage values is over here. Yeah. So all that which is taught to you is within this blue little boxes. Now all that you have to learn is, you know, the theory behind it, learn how to practically do it, and then you have the complete thing done. All right, it is fun. I really like quantitative statistics. I would love to teach that in the future as well. But for now, I'm happy even teaching the theory, because first step is understanding theory and then using it in practice. Okay, so guys, these are the basics, say the most important tabs. Then you just press OK, and then you have your answers in another window. And I'll just share with you how the answers look just briefly. All right, so this is how the answers look, students. I hope I'm sharing the right window with you. Let me just confirm. Yes, I am. Okay, so yep, you have your model summary over here. I spoke about adjusted R square. I spoke about the R square change, and I had highlighted all of these values in red. If you see the Durbin-Watson, again, we are in the safe zone 1, 2, 3. If you see the model is not significant, meaning age, gender, and fussy eating, and there was one more variable, right? Fussy eating. Yeah, and fruit and vegetable intake, all of this together is not significantly explaining the child's weight status. Okay, and then this is what I showed you in the PowerPoint slide as well, the ANOVA table. So this is how it looks in your SPSS output. And then I told you this is what you have to focus on, standardized beta coefficient values, and then your p values. As you can see, the main variables of our interest, fussy eating and fruit and vegetable, they are not significantly associated with the child's weight status, BMI, Z scores, after controlling for age and gender. Okay, so when I say these are covariates, what does this mean? It means this, where I can clearly make a statement that after controlling for age and gender, or after adjusting for age and gender, the relationship between fussy eating and the child's weight status is not significant. Does that make sense? I hope that is helpful. Okay, so these are the three model summary, ANOVA, and coefficients are the three main tables. If you see over here, again, we covered the VIF and the collinearity tolerance. This is what it means. All right, so these are the main tables, students. But of course, as I strongly encouraged, please learn how to undertake this in practice. Going into the details, like how I have explained the theory to you in detail. Similarly, this is just a very brief trailer overview. You need to learn how to do this in detail as well, which is the practical side of it, if you are to use regression in your research projects, and majority of you will. Okay. Especially in health sciences and in psychology, this is very commonly used. Okay, so yes, I hope this has been helpful. And that is the end of today's lecture, and I'll see you shortly in your coming ones. So thank you. Thank you for your time.